When my lawyer said I'd lose custody because of my travel schedule, I smiled and said, "Actually, I think the judge will want to hear about why I travel." What happened next left the courtroom speechless, and my ex-husband's attorney scrambling for damage control. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm on my phone buzzed at 4:23 a.m. in a hotel room overlooking the sunrise over Nairobi, Kenya. For most people, waking up in different time zones every few weeks might seem exhausting, but for me, it had become the rhythm of purpose. I was Dr. Elena Martinez, pediatric surgeon specializing in cleft palate repair, and today marked my 15th surgical mission to provide life-changing operations for children who otherwise would never receive treatment. But as I reached for my phone to silence the alarm, my heart dropped at the notification waiting on the screen. 3 missed calls from my attorney Patricia Hendricks, and a text message that made my blood run cold. Emergency. James filed motion for full custody. Using your travel schedule against you. Need to talk immediately. My hands trembled as I dialed Patricia's number, the weight of 8,000 miles between me and my 7-year-old daughter Sophia, suddenly feeling insurmountable. Patricia answered on the first ring, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd clearly been up all night dealing with legal crises. "Elena, thank God you called. We have a serious problem." I moved to the small balcony overlooking the bustling streets of Nairobi, where vendors were already setting up their morning markets. The contrast between the vibrant life below and the devastating news I was receiving felt surreal. "What exactly is James claiming?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "He's filed a motion alleging that your frequent international travel makes you an unfit guardian." His attorney is arguing that Sophia needs stability, consistency, and a parent who's physically present. They're painting your surgical missions as reckless abandonment and prioritizing strangers over your own child. The words hit like physical blows. For 3 years since our divorce, I'd been the primary caretaker for Sophia, carefully scheduling my surgical missions during her school breaks, or when she stayed with my mother. Every trip was planned months in advance, every detail coordinated to ensure Sophia's needs were met. "Patricia, you know that's not true. Sophia comes with me when possible, or stays with my mother who adores her. I've never missed a school event, never left her without proper care. These missions aren't vacations. I'm performing surgeries that literally save children's lives." I know that Elena and any reasonable person would understand the importance of your work, but James has hired Margaret Whitfield. I felt my stomach drop. Margaret Whitfield was known as the most ruthless family law attorney in our city, specializing in high-conflict custody cases, and notorious for her ability to twist any situation to benefit her clients. Whitfield is arguing that regardless of your intentions, Sophia is being damaged by your quote-quote pattern of abandonment. She has testimony from James claiming Sophia cries every time you leave, that she's developed separation anxiety, and that your ex-husband provides the stability she needs. I closed my eyes, remembering my last conversation with Sophia before this trip. She'd been excited about the photos I'd promised to bring back, asking detailed questions about the children I'd be helping. Yes, goodbyes were hard for both of us, but Sophia understood and supported my work in ways that constantly amazed me. "Patricia, Sophia is proud of what I do. She tells her friends that her mommy fixes children's smiles. She's learning Spanish and French because she wants to communicate with kids I help. How is that abandonment?" "It doesn't matter what we know to be true, Elena. What matters is what we can prove in court." Whitfield is very good at making good parents look neglectful. The hearing is scheduled for next Tuesday. Next Tuesday, 4 days away. I was scheduled to perform 6 more surgeries here in Nairobi before flying back. Operations that had been planned for months for children whose families had traveled hundreds of miles for this opportunity. "I can catch a flight tonight," I said, already mentally canceling surgeries and disappointing families who'd waited years for this chance. "That might actually make things worse. Whitfield will argue that you're so unreliable you can't even complete the commitments you make to these foreign trips. She'll paint you as someone who starts things but doesn't finish them when personal challenges arise." Quote, "I felt trapped in an impossible situation. Stay and complete the surgeries, appearing to prioritize my mission over my custody battle. Leave immediately and seem flighty and uncommitted to the children counting on me for surgery. What do you recommend? Patricia's pause was long enough that I could hear the traffic beginning to build on the streets below. Honestly, I think we're in trouble. James has been documenting every trip you've taken for the past year. He has photos of Sophia looking sad at the airport, recordings of her saying she misses you, and testimony from neighbors about how much she talks about wanting you home. Each piece of evidence felt like a distortion of reality. Yes, Sophia missed me when I traveled, just as I missed her terribly. But she also understood that my work mattered, that the children I helped didn't have other options for the care I could provide. There's something else, Patricia continued reluctantly. James is claiming that your international travel poses security risks, that you're exposing Sophia to potential danger through your association with unstable regions. Whitfield is painting these humanitarian missions as reckless adventures that prove poor judgment. I looked out over Nairobi, thinking about the incredible hospital staff I'd been working with, the security protocols we followed, the careful planning that went into every mission. These weren't spontaneous adventures. They were meticulously organized medical interventions conducted in partnership with established healthcare organizations. Patricia, I need you to understand something. This isn't just my career or my passion. These missions provide surgeries for children who will never have another chance. I'm not abandoning Sophia. I'm showing her that we have responsibilities to help others when we have the skills to make a difference. I understand that, Elena, and personally, I think what you do is incredible. But family court operates on different principles. The standard is, best interests of the child, and Whitfield is going to argue that Sophia's best interest requires a stable, present parent. After ending the call, I sat on the balcony watching the sun climb higher over Nairobi, feeling more alone than I had since my divorce 3 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent my time reconnecting children with their ability to smile, to speak clearly, to eat without difficulty, and now my own ability to mother was being questioned. My phone buzzed with a video call from Sophia. Despite the early morning hour in Colorado, she was already awake, probably getting ready for school with my mother's help. Her beautiful face filled the screen, missing 2 front teeth but beaming with the unconscious joy that made every sacrifice worthwhile. Mommy, did you fix more kids yesterday? I did, sweetheart. I helped 4 children who will be able to smile just like you. That's so cool. Grandma says you're the best doctor in the world. When are you coming home? The simple question carried weight it had never held before. Very soon, baby. Probably sooner than planned. But what about the other kids who need surgery? You can't leave them without fixing their smiles. Sophia's immediate concern for children she'd never met, her instinctive understanding of the moral complexity of my work, reminded me why I'd always believed my daughter was learning valuable lessons about service and sacrifice through my missions. Mommy, are you sad? You look worried. I forced brightness into my voice. Just missing you extra much today. But I'm so proud of how grown up and understanding you are about Mommy's work. Daddy says you care more about other kids than me. But I know that's not true. You help kids who don't have any doctors, and I have lots of people who love me. My heart clenched at this revelation. James had been planting seeds of doubt in Sophia's mind, trying to undermine her understanding of my work. Yet somehow, her 7-year-old wisdom saw through the manipulation. After we ended the call, I walked to the hospital where I'd be operating today. The pediatric ward was filled with children and families who'd traveled extraordinary distances for these surgeries. Maria, age 5, had been born with a severe cleft that prevented her from eating properly. Her family had saved for 2 years to make the trip to Nairobi for this surgery. As I reviewed her case files, I thought about the impossible choice I was facing. Cancel the remaining surgeries and fly home to defend my fitness as a mother, disappointing children like Maria and their families. Or complete my commitment here, and risk having a judge decide that my dedication to helping other children made me unfit to raise my own. Dr. James Mwangi, the lead pediatric surgeon at the hospital, found me in the consultation room as I was struggling with this decision. "Dr. Martinez, you seem troubled today. Is everything all right?" Quote. I explained the situation, watching his expression grow increasingly incredulous as I described the custody challenge. "You are being criticized for providing life-saving surgery to children who have no other options? This is beyond comprehension. Your daughter should be proud to have a mother who serves others with such skill and compassion. Unfortunately, the legal system doesn't always see it that way. They're focused on physical presence, not the values being modeled." Dr. Mwangi shook his head firmly. "Dr. Martinez, in my 30 years of medicine, I have seen many foreign doctors come to help. Some come for experience, some for resume building, some for personal satisfaction. But you come with a different spirit. You train our staff, you follow up on patients. You return year after year to build relationships and sustainable care." He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo from last year's mission. Sophia and me surrounded by children from the ward, all of them smiling post-surgery. Sophia was helping distribute toys we'd brought, completely at ease and engaged with the children. "Your daughter was here last year. She was not traumatized or abandoned. She was learning to see the world beyond herself, to understand suffering and healing, to appreciate the privilege of being able to help others." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The photo reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten in my panic about the custody battle. Sophia had accompanied me on 2 missions when school schedules allowed. She'd seen firsthand what I did, met the children I helped, and developed her own sense of compassion and global awareness. Dr. Mwangi, do you think what I'm doing is wrong? Should I choose between being a good mother and continuing this work? He sat down across from me, his expression serious but kind. "Dr. Martinez, what you're doing is showing your daughter that love is not possessive, it is generous. You are teaching her that when we have skills that can heal suffering, we have a responsibility to use them. This is not abandonment, this is modeling the highest form of love." His words crystallized something that had been forming in my mind since Patricia's devastating phone call. I wasn't just a mother who happened to be a surgeon. I was a mother raising a daughter to understand that love extends beyond our immediate family, that privilege comes with responsibility, that making a difference in the world requires sacrifice and dedication. James and his attorney were trying to frame my surgical missions as selfish pursuits that damaged Sophia, but the truth was exactly the opposite. These missions were teaching Sophia lessons about service, sacrifice, and global citizenship that no classroom could provide. That afternoon, I performed Maria's surgery, carefully reconstructing her cleft palate and thinking about the 2 children in my life, the 5-year-old on my operating table who would now be able to eat and speak normally, and the 7-year-old back home who was learning that her mother's love was big enough to include children all over the world. As Maria woke up from anesthesia and smiled for the first time in her life without hiding her face, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to apologize for my work or allow James and his attorney to reframe my dedication as negligence. I was going to fight for my daughter by showing the court exactly what kind of mother I really was, one who believed that love multiplies when it's shared, that service to others teaches children the highest values, and that Sophia was learning lessons about compassion and global citizenship that would shape her into an extraordinary human being. The custody battle wasn't just about my right to travel for work. It was about what kind of world we wanted Sophia to inherit, and what kind of woman we wanted her to become. James had no idea what was coming, but he was about to discover that attacking a mother's dedication to serving others was the biggest mistake he could have made. The flight from Nairobi to Denver felt longer than usual, every hour bringing me closer to a custody battle that could fundamentally alter my relationship with Sophia. I'd completed all 6 scheduled surgeries, despite Patricia's warnings that it might look bad in court. As I watched the African continent disappear beneath the clouds, I knew I'd made the right choice, not just for the children I'd helped, but for the example I was setting for my daughter. During the layover in Amsterdam, I made a series of phone calls that would change everything. The first was to Dr. Rebecca Chen, a child psychologist who specialized in evaluating the emotional impact of parents' careers on children. We'd met at a medical conference 2 years ago, and she'd been fascinated by my stories about Sophia's involvement in my humanitarian work. Elena, I've been following your surgical missions through the medical journals. Your work is extraordinary, Dr. Chen said warmly, but I imagine you're not calling just to catch up. I explained the custody situation, watching business travelers hurry past with their rolling suitcases while I faced the potential loss of my daughter. Dr. Chen listened without interruption until I finished outlining James's claims. Elena, what you're describing is actually the opposite of what research shows about children's psychological development. Children whose parents engage in meaningful work that serves others typically develop stronger empathy, better global awareness, and more secure attachment, not anxiety or abandonment issues. My heart lifted slightly. Could you testify to that in court? Absolutely. But more importantly, I'd like to conduct a formal evaluation of Sophia. If what you're telling me is accurate, that she's proud of your work and engaged with your missions, the psychological testing will demonstrate that conclusively. My second call was to Carmen Rodriguez, a documentary filmmaker who'd been following my surgical team for the past year. Carmen was developing a film about medical humanitarianism, and she'd captured hours of footage during my missions, including moments with Sophia when she'd accompanied me. Elena, I have incredible footage of you and Sophia together in Guatemala last year. She was helping distribute post-surgery care packages, talking to children in Spanish, showing genuine excitement about the work. It's beautiful material that shows a child who's not traumatized but inspired. Would you be willing to provide that footage for a custody hearing? More than willing. I'll also testify about what I observed during filming. Sophia wasn't a neglected child tagging along. She was an engaged young person learning about service and global citizenship. My third call was the most important. I reached out to Maria Santos, the mother of 8-year-old Diego, a boy I'd operated on during my first mission to Colombia 3 years ago. Diego had been born with a severe bilateral cleft, and his transformation after surgery had been remarkable. But what made this call significant was that Maria had become a close friend, and she'd witnessed firsthand how Sophia understood and supported my work. Dr. Elena! Maria's voice was filled with warmth despite the early morning hour in Bogota. How is beautiful Sophia? She's wonderful, Maria, but I need your help. I explained the custody situation, feeling emotional as I described how my work was being used against me. This is ridiculous, Maria said firmly. Sophia loves the work you do. When you brought her to Colombia, she spent hours playing with Diego and the other children. She told me she wanted to be a doctor like her mama to help kids feel better. How is this abandonment? Would you be willing to speak to my attorney to testify about what you observed when Sophia was with me during missions? Of course. And Dr. Elena, I will bring other mothers too. We all remember Sophia. How kind she was. How proud she was of you. We will tell the truth about what kind of mother you are. By the time I landed in Denver, I'd assembled something Margaret Whitfield hadn't expected. A network of witnesses who'd seen Sophia and me together during my humanitarian work. But I knew testimony alone wouldn't be enough. I needed to fundamentally reframe the narrative James was trying to create. Patricia met me at the airport, her usually composed demeanor showing signs of stress. Elena, I'm glad you completed your surgeries, but Whitfield has been busy. She's filed additional motions claiming that your failure to return immediately when served with custody papers demonstrates exactly the kind of priorities that make you unfit for primary custody. As we drove through Denver's evening traffic, I felt the weight of the challenge ahead. Patricia, I need to ask you something honestly. Do you think I'm a bad mother? She glanced at me in surprise. Elena, that's not. Please, just answer honestly. Patricia pulled into a coffee shop parking lot and turned to face me fully. Elena, in 15 years of family law, I've seen every kind of parent. You are one of the most dedicated mothers I've ever represented. But that's not the issue. The issue is perception, legal precedent, and Whitfield's ability to manipulate facts. What if we stop playing defense? What if instead of trying to minimize my travel, we make it the centerpiece of why I'm an exceptional mother? Patricia's eyebrows rose. That's a risky strategy. You'd be doubling down on exactly what they're attacking you for. But what if we can prove that my humanitarian work makes me a better mother, not a worse one? That Sophia is benefiting from these experiences in ways James's conventional approach never could provide. I pulled out my phone and showed Patricia photos from my recent missions, not just surgical shots, but images of Sophia from previous trips where she'd accompanied me. Sophia helping younger children, learning phrases in different languages, carefully observing surgeries with the fascination of someone who understood she was witnessing healing. Look at her face in these photos, Patricia. Does this look like a traumatized child? Or does this look like a young person who's learning that the world is bigger than her immediate environment, that helping others is a privilege and responsibility? Patricia studied the photos carefully. Elena, these are powerful images, but Whitfield will argue that you're exposing Sophia to inappropriate medical situations, that you're using her as a prop for your missions. Then we need experts who can testify about child development, about the psychological benefits of exposing children to service opportunities, about global citizenship and empathy development. I told Patricia about my conversations with Dr. Chen, Carmen Rodriguez, and Maria Santos. As I outlined the growing list of people willing to testify on my behalf, I saw something shift in Patricia's expression. You know what, Elena? You might be onto something. Instead of apologizing for your work, we make James's narrow worldview the problem. We argue that limiting Sophia's exposure to her mother's humanitarian work would actually harm her development. Exactly. We're not just fighting for my right to travel. We're fighting for Sophia's right to grow up understanding that love extends beyond our immediate family, that we have responsibilities to help others when we have the capability. Patricia was quiet for a moment, clearly processing the implications of this strategic shift. It's ambitious and risky. If we fail, the court might see us as defiant and unrepentant. But if we succeed, we establish a precedent that parents shouldn't be penalized for modeling service and global citizenship. That evening, I sat in my home office surrounded by case files and legal documents, but my attention was focused on the walls around me. They were covered with photos from my surgical missions, thank you letters from families of children I'd helped, and artwork Sophia had created inspired by my work. One drawing showed stick figures of children from different countries, all smiling after surgery, with "Mommy helps kids everywhere," written in Sophia's careful 7-year-old handwriting. My mother, Carmen, knocked on the office door with a cup of tea and her characteristic no-nonsense expression. At 68, she'd raised 5 children while working as a high school principal, and her perspective on parenting carried decades of wisdom. "Misha, I've been thinking about this custody nonsense all day. That man is a fool if he thinks keeping Sophia from understanding your work is good for her. Mom, James isn't entirely wrong about the challenges. I am gone more than most parents. Sophia does miss me when I travel." Carmen sat down across from my desk, her eyes flashing with the same determination that had carried our family through numerous challenges. "Elena, when you were Sophia's age, your father worked double shifts at the hospital to provide for us. I worried constantly about the time he spent away, but you know what you learned from his dedication? That work has meaning beyond paychecks, that helping others is a privilege, that sacrifice for important causes builds character." She gestured toward the photos covering my walls. "Sophia is learning lessons that privileged children in this country never learn. She's seeing poverty and resilience, understanding that not every child has access to basic medical care, developing empathy for people from different cultures. How is this damaging her?" But James argues that she needs stability, predictability, a parent who's physically present for everyday activities. "James provides babysitting, not parenting," Carmen said sharply. "When Sophia stays with him, what does she learn? That success means accumulating material possessions, that other people's problems aren't our concern, that the comfortable life we have doesn't come with responsibilities to help others." My mother's words crystallized something I'd been struggling to articulate. This custody battle wasn't just about travel schedules. It was about 2 fundamentally different philosophies of child-rearing. James wanted to raise Sophia in a bubble of privilege and comfort. I wanted to raise her with an understanding that privilege comes with responsibility. "Mom, do you really think Sophia is better off being exposed to the work I do?" Carmen pulled out her phone and showed me a video she'd taken last week. Sophia was playing hospital with her dolls, carefully performing surgery, while explaining to her stuffed animals that they would feel much better soon. She was mimicking techniques I'd shown her, using medical terminology with startling accuracy. That little girl doesn't just love you, Elena. She understands you. She's proud of what you do because she sees the difference you make. James wants to protect her from the world's problems, but you're teaching her to be part of the solution. The next morning brought a breakthrough I hadn't expected. Dr. Chen called with results from her preliminary research into children of humanitarian workers. Elena, I've been reviewing psychological studies on children whose parents engage in international service work. The data is remarkably consistent. These children typically score higher on empathy measures, demonstrate better cultural competency, and show increased resilience compared to peers from similar socioeconomic backgrounds. Could that research be used in court? Absolutely. But I have something even better. I contacted the American Academy of Child Psychology, and they're willing to file an amicus brief supporting your case. They're arguing that penalizing parents for engaging in humanitarian work sets a dangerous precedent that could discourage medical professionals from providing essential international services. I felt a surge of hope. The American Academy of Child Psychology was one of the most respected organizations in the field. Their support would carry tremendous weight with any judge. There's more, Dr. Chen continued. I've been in touch with UNESCO's Child Development Division. They're very interested in your case because it touches on children's rights to global education and cultural exposure. They might be willing to provide expert testimony about the developmental benefits of international humanitarian exposure. That afternoon, Patricia called with news that changed our entire strategy. Elena, Whitfield made a mistake. In her eagerness to paint you as irresponsible, she filed a motion requesting that the court restrict all of your international travel pending the custody decision. How is that a mistake? Because it's overreach. She's essentially asking the court to prevent you from practicing medicine in your specialty area. That opens the door for us to argue that this isn't about Sophia's welfare. It's about James trying to control and sabotage your career. I felt pieces of a larger strategy clicking into place. Patricia, what if we demonstrate that restricting my humanitarian work would actually harm Sophia by depriving her of the educational and developmental benefits she gains from understanding this work? We'd need compelling expert testimony to make that argument. We have it. Dr. Chen has research data and professional support. Carmen Rodriguez has documentary footage showing Sophia thriving during missions. And I have something else, a letter from Sophia herself. I showed Patricia a note Sophia had written for a school assignment about heroes. In her careful second-grade handwriting, she'd described her mother as someone who, quote, helps kids in faraway places get better so they can smile and eat food. The letter included drawings of children from different countries and concluded with, I want to be like my mommy and help people feel better. Patricia read the letter twice, her expression growing more confident. Elena, this changes everything. We're not just defending your right to travel. We're fighting for Sophia's right to continue learning from one of the most meaningful educational experiences a child could have. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the shift that had occurred over the past 48 hours. Instead of apologizing for my humanitarian work, we were preparing to celebrate it. Instead of minimizing Sophia's involvement, we were highlighting how it benefited her development. Instead of playing defense, we were going on the offensive with a message that resonated far beyond our individual case. Sophia was waiting for me in the kitchen, her homework spread across the table while my mother prepared dinner. She looked up with the bright smile that made every sacrifice worthwhile. Mommy, guess what? I told my class about the kids you helped in Africa, and Mrs. Peterson said maybe our class could raise money to send toys to children in hospitals like where you work. I knelt beside her chair, overwhelmed by pride in the compassionate young person she was becoming. That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart. Would you like to help organize something like that? Yes. And Mommy, when you go on your next trip, can I come with you again? I want to learn more about how to help kids feel better. Looking at Sophia's eager face, I realized that James and Margaret Whitfield had fundamentally misunderstood what they were attacking. They saw my humanitarian work as competing with my role as a mother. But Sophia understood the truth, that my work wasn't separate from my mothering, it was an extension of it. The custody battle ahead would determine more than where Sophia lived. It would decide what kind of future she'd be prepared for, one where she understood her responsibility to help others, or one where she learned that comfort and security were more important than service and compassion. James had no idea that in attacking my dedication to helping children worldwide, he'd given me the perfect opportunity to demonstrate exactly what kind of mother and what kind of woman I was raising Sophia to become. The Denver family court building stood imposing against the October sky as I walked up the courthouse steps with Patricia, my hands trembling slightly as I clutched a folder containing 3 years of documentation I'd never imagined I'd need to defend my motherhood. Today was our preliminary hearing, where Judge Margaret Foster would decide whether to grant James's emergency motion for full custody pending the final trial. Patricia had warned me that preliminary hearings typically favored maintaining the status quo, but Margaret Whitfield was asking for an unprecedented restriction, complete prohibition of my international travel while the custody case proceeded. If granted, it would effectively end my ability to perform humanitarian surgeries for the 6 to 8 months this case could drag on. Remember, Patricia whispered as we approached the courtroom doors, today is about demonstrating that James's motion is unreasonable and potentially harmful to Sophia. We're not trying to win the full case yet, just buying time to build our complete defense. Inside the courtroom, I saw James for the first time since filing papers 3 months ago. He sat beside Margaret Whitfield, wearing an expensive suit and an expression of concerned fatherhood that I knew was performed for the judge's benefit. When he caught my eye, his slight smirk reminded me of every condescending conversation we'd had during our marriage about my practical idealism. Judge Foster entered with the efficient bearing of someone who'd heard thousands of custody disputes. At 58, she had a reputation for no-nonsense decisions based on evidence rather than emotion. Patricia had researched her extensively. Judge Foster had 2 adopted children from international adoption and had previously ruled in favor of parents whose careers required unusual schedules when it served children's best interests. Your Honor, Margaret Whitfield began, rising with practiced grace, we're here today because Dr. Martinez has demonstrated a pattern of behavior that places her personal ambitions above her daughter's fundamental needs for stability and security. Whitfield moved to an easel displaying a timeline of my international travel over the past 2 years. Each trip was marked in red, creating a visual impression of constant absence, despite the fact that most missions lasted only 1 to 2 weeks. Dr. Martinez has been absent from the country for a total of 47 days in the past 18 months. During these absences, 7-year-old Sophia has been left in the care of various relatives while her father, my client, has consistently provided stable, reliable presence in her life. I watched Judge Foster study the timeline, her expression neutral but attentive. Whitfield continued her presentation with the smooth confidence of someone accustomed to winning. More concerning, Your Honor, is Dr. Martinez's complete disregard for this court's authority. When served with custody papers requiring her immediate attention to her daughter's welfare, she chose to remain in Kenya for 4 additional days to complete surgical procedures on strangers' children. The word strangers hit like a slap. Every child I'd operated on had a name, a story, a family, who'd waited months or years for the surgery that could transform their life. But Whitfield had reduced them to anonymous distractions from my real responsibilities. Dr. Martinez's priorities are clear, Whitfield concluded. Her international medical tourism takes precedence over her daughter's emotional needs, educational stability, and psychological well-being. Mr. Rodriguez is requesting full custody to provide Sophia with the consistent, present parenting she deserves. Judge Foster turned to Patricia. Ms. Hendricks, how does your client respond to these allegations? Patricia stood, and I felt my future hanging in the balance of her next words. Your Honor, Ms. Whitfield's presentation fundamentally mischaracterizes both Dr. Martinez's work and its impact on Sophia. Rather than harming Sophia, Dr. Martinez's humanitarian missions provide her daughter with educational and developmental opportunities that most children never receive. Quote, Patricia approached the bench with a thick folder. I'd like to present documentation showing that Sophia has actually thrived during her mother's international service. This includes psychological evaluations, academic records showing improved performance, and testimony from teachers about Sophia's increased empathy and cultural awareness. Ms. Hendricks, while that may be relevant to the final custody determination, today's hearing is specifically about the emergency motion to restrict travel. Can you demonstrate immediate harm if this restriction is granted? This was the moment Patricia and I had prepared for. Yes, Your Honor. Granting this motion would not only damage Dr. Martinez's career, but would send Sophia the message that her mother's life-saving work is less important than convenience and conventional expectations. Patricia pulled out Sophia's school assignment about heroes, the one where she described wanting to help people like her mother. Sophia has explicitly expressed pride in her mother's work and desire to continue learning from these experiences. Restricting Dr. Martinez's travel would deprive Sophia of educational opportunities that are clearly benefiting her development. Judge Foster examined the assignment, and I caught a flicker of interest in her expression. Ms. Hendricks, do you have expert testimony supporting the claim that this child benefits from her mother's international travel? We do, Your Honor. Dr. Rebecca Chen, a licensed child psychologist, has evaluated Sophia and is prepared to testify that children of humanitarian workers typically demonstrate enhanced empathy, global awareness, and emotional resilience. Margaret Whitfield stood quickly. Objection, Your Honor. Dr. Chen's evaluation was conducted without court approval and should not be admitted in emergency proceedings. Sustained, Judge Foster ruled. However, Ms. Hendricks, you may present Dr. Chen's credentials and general research findings about children of international humanitarian workers. Patricia outlined Dr. Chen's research while I watched James shift uncomfortably in his seat. His strategy had been to paint my work as selfish abandonment, but Patricia was reframing it as educational enrichment that any good parent would want for their child. Your Honor, Patricia continued, we also have documentary evidence from filmmaker Carmen Rodriguez, who has been following Dr. Martinez's team for over a year. Her footage shows Sophia actively engaged and happy during international missions, directly contradicting claims of trauma or abandonment. Judge Foster made notes while Patricia spoke, but her expression remained professionally neutral. Ms. Hendricks, while this information may be relevant to the full custody hearing, I need to understand the immediate impact of granting or denying the travel restriction. This was our crucial moment. Patricia had coached me on this response, but delivering it felt like jumping off a cliff without knowing if the parachute would open. Your Honor, Patricia said, Dr. Martinez has a scheduled mission to Guatemala in 3 weeks to perform cleft palate surgeries on 12 children. These surgeries have been planned for 6 months, and the families have traveled hundreds of miles specifically for Dr. Martinez's expertise. Canceling would not only harm these children, but would also breach Dr. Martinez's contractual obligations to the International Medical Relief Foundation. Judge Foster looked up from her notes. Are you saying that restricting Dr. Martinez's travel would constitute interference with her professional obligations? Exactly, Your Honor. Mr. Rodriguez is essentially asking this court to prevent Dr. Martinez from practicing her medical specialty, which requires international travel. This goes far beyond normal custody considerations. Margaret Whitfield rose again, her confidence beginning to show cracks. Your Honor, plenty of surgeons practice successfully without international travel. Dr. Martinez could continue her career domestically. Judge Foster's eyebrows rose slightly. Ms. Whitfield, are you suggesting this court should dictate how a licensed physician practices medicine? Not dictate, Your Honor, but prioritize the child's needs over professional preferences. Professional preferences? The edge in Judge Foster's voice made Whitfield pause. Ms. Whitfield, are you characterizing humanitarian medical missions as recreational activities? I held my breath as the courtroom fell silent. Judge Foster's question had exposed the fundamental weakness in James's argument, the assumption that helping disadvantaged children was somehow selfish rather than selfless. No, Your Honor, Whitfield backtracked. But the frequency and duration of Dr. Martinez's absences create instability for Sophia regardless of the worthy nature of the work. Quote, Judge Foster turned back to Patricia. Ms. Hendricks, how many days per year does Dr. Martinez typically travel for these missions? Approximately 30 to 40 days annually, Your Honor. Comparable to many professionals who travel for business. The difference is that Dr. Martinez's travel serves humanitarian rather than commercial purposes. And during these absences, where does Sophia stay? With her grandmother, Carmen Martinez, who has been Sophia's primary caregiver during travel periods for the past 3 years. Sophia has a stable, loving environment and maintains all her regular activities. Judge Foster made additional notes. then looked directly at me for the first time. Dr. Martinez, I understand you've just returned from Kenya. How many children did you operate on during that mission? I stood, my voice steadier than I'd expected. 6 children, Your Honor. Ages ranging from 8 months to 12 years. All cleft palate repairs that will allow these children to eat, speak, and smile normally for the first time in their lives. And if you hadn't completed those surgeries, those children would have continued suffering from conditions that prevent proper nutrition, speech development, and social integration. Some might not have survived to adulthood due to complications from untreated clefts. Judge Foster nodded slowly. Dr. Martinez, how does Sophia respond when you return from these missions? This was unexpected territory, but I answered honestly. She's always excited to hear about the children I've helped, Your Honor. She asks detailed questions about their surgeries and recovery. Last month, she asked if she could start a toy drive at her school to send gifts to children in international hospitals. Your Honor, Margaret Whitfield interrupted, a 7-year-old's response doesn't necessarily reflect her true emotional state. Children often try to please absent parents. Judge Foster's expression hardened slightly. Ms. Whitfield, are you suggesting this court should ignore a child's expressed feelings about her mother's work? The hearing continued for another hour, with both sides presenting additional evidence and arguments. Patricia introduced letters from Sophia's teachers, noting her above-average empathy and cultural awareness. Whitfield countered with statistics about children of frequently traveling parents. But I could sense a shift in the courtroom's energy. Judge Foster's questions increasingly focused on the specific benefits Sophia derived from my work, rather than the general challenges of parental travel. Finally, Judge Foster called for closing arguments. Margaret Whitfield delivered a polished summary about children's needs for stability and presence. But her words felt hollow after the detailed discussion of my humanitarian work. Patricia's closing was passionate but precise. Your Honor, granting this motion would send a message that serving others is incompatible with good parenting. Sophia is not suffering from her mother's missions, she's learning from them. She's developing into a young person who understands that privilege comes with responsibility, that helping others is a noble calling, and that love extends beyond our immediate family. Patricia paused, looking directly at Judge Foster. Mr. Rodriguez wants to raise Sophia in a bubble of comfort and conventional expectations. Dr. Martinez is raising her to be a global citizen who understands her responsibility to help others. This court should not penalize a mother for modeling the highest values of service and compassion. Judge Foster retired to her chambers for deliberation, leaving us in the courthouse hallway for what felt like hours but was actually 37 minutes. Patricia paced while reviewing her notes, but I sat quietly, thinking about the 12 children waiting for surgery in Guatemala and wondering if I'd be allowed to help them. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Foster's expression was unreadable. I've considered both parties' arguments regarding the emergency motion to restrict Dr. Martinez's international travel pending custody determination. My heart hammered as she continued. While Mr. Rodriguez raises legitimate concerns about parental presence and stability, I find insufficient evidence that Dr. Martinez's humanitarian missions constitute immediate harm to Sophia's welfare. Relief flooded through me, but Judge Foster wasn't finished. More importantly, this court will not interfere with a licensed physician's professional obligations without clear evidence that such interference serves the child's best interests. The evidence presented suggests Sophia may actually benefit from exposure to her mother's humanitarian work. Margaret Whitfield's face went pale as Judge Foster delivered her ruling. The emergency motion for travel restriction is denied. Dr. Martinez may continue her scheduled humanitarian missions pending final custody determination. However, I'm ordering a comprehensive custody evaluation by an independent court-appointed psychologist, including assessment of Sophia's emotional response to her mother's travel schedule. As we left the courthouse, Patricia was cautiously optimistic. Elena, this was better than we hoped. Judge Foster clearly understands the value of your work, and she's ordered exactly the kind of evaluation that will demonstrate Sophia's positive response to your missions. But I knew this was just the beginning. James and Margaret Whitfield would return for the full custody hearing with new strategies, additional witnesses, and refined arguments. They'd learned from today's setbacks and would be better prepared next time. However, something fundamental had shifted. Instead of apologizing for my humanitarian work, I'd defended it as beneficial to Sophia. Instead of minimizing my missions, I'd highlighted their educational value. Instead of playing defense, I'd gone on the offensive with a message that resonated beyond our specific case. That evening, Sophia ran into my arms when I arrived home, her face bright with excitement. "Mommy, Grandma said you went to court today to talk about your doctor work. Did you tell them about all the kids you help?" "I did, sweetheart, and guess what? I can still go to Guatemala next month to help more children." Sophia clapped her hands together. "Can I help you pack the toys for the kids there? I want to write letters telling them they're going to feel so much better after their surgeries." Looking at my daughter's eager face, I realized that James had fundamentally misunderstood what he was fighting against. He thought he was battling a selfish mother who prioritized career over child. But he was actually fighting a woman who was raising her daughter to understand that true love means serving others, that privilege comes with responsibility, and that the world needs people who are willing to sacrifice comfort for compassion. The real custody battle was just beginning, but today had proven something crucial. My humanitarian work wasn't a weakness to be defended. It was a strength to be celebrated, a gift to be shared, and a legacy to be passed on to the next generation. James had no idea what he'd unleashed by challenging not just my fitness as a mother, but the values I was teaching my daughter about love, service, and global citizenship. The court-appointed psychologist Dr. Amanda Harrison arrived at my home on a crisp November morning with a professional smile and an assessment toolkit that would determine Sophia's emotional well-being regarding my humanitarian work. As I watched her set up recording equipment in my living room, I realized that every interaction between Sophia and myself over the next 3 hours would be scrutinized for signs of trauma, anxiety, or the abandonment issues James claimed my travel created. "Dr. Martinez," Dr. Harrison said as she arranged her materials, "I want you to know that my evaluation will be completely objective. I'm not here to validate either parent's position but to assess Sophia's actual emotional state and development." I nodded, though my hands trembled slightly as I offered her coffee. This evaluation could determine my future with Sophia, yet I had to trust that the truth of our relationship would speak louder than James's carefully constructed narrative of maternal neglect. Sophia bounded into the room with the unconscious confidence of a child who had no idea her custody was being evaluated. She wore her favorite dress, the one covered in flags from different countries, and carried the photo album we'd created together documenting my surgical missions. "Are you the lady who wants to hear about Mommy's doctor work?" Sophia asked Dr. Harrison with characteristic directness. Dr. Harrison smiled genuinely for the first time since arriving. "I am. Would you like to tell me about it?" What followed was the most nerve-wracking and simultaneously pride-filled 3 hours of my life. Dr. Harrison conducted a series of assessments designed to reveal Sophia's emotional state, attachment patterns, and psychological response to my travel schedule. But rather than the traumatized, anxious child James had described, Sophia demonstrated remarkable emotional intelligence and global awareness. When Dr. Harrison asked Sophia to draw her family, she created a picture showing me in scrubs, standing next to children from different countries, all smiling after surgery. "Mommy makes sad kids happy," she explained matter-of-factly. "That's why she has to travel sometimes, because some kids don't have doctors where they live." During the separation anxiety assessment, Dr. Harrison asked Sophia how she felt when I left for missions. "I miss Mommy," Sophia admitted honestly, "but I know she's helping kids who really need surgery. And she always comes back with pictures and stories, and sometimes she brings kids who got better to visit us on video calls." Dr. Harrison's eyebrows rose at this revelation. "You talk to the children your mother operates on?" Sophia nodded enthusiastically. "Uh-huh. There's Diego in Colombia who can eat pizza now, and Maria in Kenya who can smile without covering her mouth, and Carlos in Guatemala who can talk clearly to his friends." Mommy says I helped them feel better because I was brave when she had to go away. I watched Dr. Harrison take detailed notes as Sophia continued describing specific children I'd operated on, demonstrating not just awareness of my work, but genuine emotional investment in the outcomes. This wasn't a child traumatized by maternal absence. This was a young person who understood that her temporary sacrifice allowed other children to receive life-changing care. The most revealing moment came when Dr. Harrison presented Sophia with a hypothetical scenario. If you could have your mommy home all the time, but it meant she couldn't help sick children anymore, what would you choose? Sophia considered this seriously, her 7-year-old face scrunched in concentration. That would be selfish, she said finally. Mommy taught me that when you can help people, you should help them. The kids who need surgery don't have other doctors who can fix them. But I have Grandma and Daddy and lots of people who love me. Dr. Harrison's professional composure slipped slightly, revealing surprise at such sophisticated moral reasoning from someone Sophia's age. Sophia, do you ever feel angry that your mommy travels for work? Sometimes I feel sad, Sophia replied honestly, but not angry. Angry is what you feel when someone does something bad. Helping sick kids isn't bad. It's good. Daddy says Mommy cares more about other kids than me, but that's not true. Mommy loves me so much that she taught me how to love other people too. After Dr. Harrison completed her individual assessment with Sophia, she asked to observe our natural interaction. I had prepared for this by planning activities that would demonstrate our relationship's strength, but Dr. Harrison requested something specific. Dr. Martinez, I'd like to see how you and Sophia typically process your return from missions together. I pulled out photos from my recent Kenya trip, and Sophia immediately snuggled beside me on the couch with the familiarity of a well-established routine. As I showed her pictures of the children I'd operated on, Sophia asked detailed questions that revealed both her emotional investment and intellectual curiosity. Mommy, did this little boy's cleft go all the way to his nose? Was it hard to fix? She studied the before and after photos with the serious attention of someone who understood she was witnessing transformation. It was complex surgery, sweetheart, but his parents were so grateful, he'll be able to eat and speak normally now. Sophia traced the post-surgery photo with her finger. He looks so happy. Does he know that I helped him get better by being brave when you were gone? He does. I told him about my brave daughter back home who understands that helping others is important. Dr. Harrison observed this interaction with growing interest, particularly noting Sophia's sophisticated understanding of cause and effect, her empathy for children she'd never met, and her emotional maturity in connecting her temporary sacrifice to positive outcomes for others. The evaluation concluded with Dr. Harrison interviewing me alone, while Sophia played in the backyard. Dr. Martinez, in 15 years of custody evaluations, I've rarely seen a child with such advanced emotional intelligence and global awareness. Sophia demonstrates secure attachment, remarkable empathy, and sophisticated moral reasoning that's well above average for her age group. Relief flooded through me, but Dr. Harrison wasn't finished. However, I need to understand the practical realities of your travel schedule. How do you maintain connection with Sophia during missions? I showed her my phone, displaying the communication app Sophia and I used for daily video calls during my travels. We talk every morning and evening when I'm away. Sophia helps me prepare for missions by researching the countries I'll visit, and she participates in follow-up calls with families of children I've operated on. You involve Sophia in follow-up calls? With the family's permission, yes. It helps Sophia understand the long-term impact of the work and builds relationships with children from different cultures. Last month, Sophia taught Diego's sister in Colombia how to play her favorite card game over video call. Dr. Harrison reviewed her notes thoughtfully. Dr. Martinez, what you're describing is remarkable parental engagement despite physical distance. Many children whose parents travel domestically for business have less meaningful connection to their parents' work than Sophia has to yours. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into preparing for the full custody hearing with the intensity I usually reserve for complex surgical cases. Patricia connected me with Dr. Maria Gonzalez, a renowned expert in international child development who specialized in children of humanitarian workers. Elena, Dr. Gonzalez explained during our first consultation, your case represents something larger than individual custody. There's growing research showing that children exposed to international humanitarian work develop enhanced global citizenship, cultural competency, and ethical reasoning. Sophia's development exemplifies these benefits. Dr. Gonzalez had agreed to serve as an expert witness, bringing 30 years of research into how children process their parents' international service work. Her studies had followed hundreds of children of doctors, aid workers, and humanitarian professionals, documenting consistently positive developmental outcomes. The children in my longitudinal studies typically demonstrate higher empathy scores, better conflict resolution skills, and stronger academic performance compared to peers from similar socioeconomic backgrounds, she explained. They're learning that the world extends beyond their immediate environment and that they have responsibilities to help others. Meanwhile, Carmen Rodriguez had been editing footage from my missions specifically for the custody hearing. The documentary clip she'd prepared showed Sophia engaged, happy, and actively participating in age-appropriate aspects of my humanitarian work. "Elena, this footage tells a powerful story," Carmen said as we reviewed the edited segments. "Sophia isn't just tolerating your work, she's thriving because of it. She's learning languages, developing cultural awareness, and demonstrating empathy that most adults never achieve." One particular clip showed Sophia in Guatemala, carefully distributing coloring books to children waiting for surgery, while speaking to them in elementary Spanish she'd learned specifically for the trip. Her comfort level with children from different cultural backgrounds was remarkable, and her natural leadership in organizing activities demonstrated confidence rather than anxiety. But perhaps my most valuable preparation came from an unexpected source. Dr. Rebecca Chen introduced me to Dr. Sarah Kim, a former Doctors Without Borders surgeon who had successfully fought a similar custody battle 5 years earlier. "Elena, when my ex-husband tried to use my humanitarian work against me, I made the mistake of being defensive," Dr. Kim explained over coffee. "I spent months apologizing for my missions and minimizing their importance. It was only when I started celebrating my work and its benefits to my children that the court began to understand what was really at stake." Dr. Kim's case had set important legal precedent by establishing that parents couldn't be penalized for engaging in humanitarian work that provided educational benefits to their children. Her victory had helped other medical professionals facing similar challenges. The key is demonstrating that your humanitarian work doesn't compete with your parenting, it enhances it. You're not just raising Sophia to be successful, you're raising her to be significant. There's a huge difference. Through Dr. Kim, I connected with an informal network of medical professionals who had faced custody challenges related to their international service work. Each story reinforced the same pattern. Parents who apologetically defended their humanitarian missions typically lost, while those who confidently celebrated the educational benefits to their children typically won. Dr. Ahmed Hassan, a cardiac surgeon who performed missions in refugee camps, shared particularly relevant advice. "Elena, the court needs to understand that we're not choosing between our children and other people's children. We're teaching our children that love multiplies when it's shared, that privilege comes with responsibility, and that true security comes from building a better world for everyone." As the full custody hearing approached, I also focused on building Sophia's own understanding of the legal process. Child psychologists recommended involving children in age-appropriate discussions about custody decisions, and Sophia had been asking increasingly sophisticated questions about why we were going to court. "Mommy, is Daddy trying to stop you from helping sick kids?" she asked one evening as we worked together on a school project about different countries. I chose my words carefully, balancing honesty with age-appropriate explanation. "Daddy is worried that my travel makes you sad, and he wants the judge to understand his concerns. The judge will listen to everyone and decide what's best for you. But I'm not sad about your doctor work. I'm proud of it. Will the judge listen to me? The judge will definitely consider your feelings, sweetheart. But more importantly, she'll want to understand whether you're happy and healthy and learning good things about the world." Sophia nodded seriously. "I am learning good things. Mrs. Peterson says I know more about geography than most fourth graders, and I can count to 10 in 4 languages. And I know that helping people is more important than just taking care of yourself." As December arrived, I realized that the past month had transformed my understanding of this custody battle. Initially, I had seen it as a challenge to overcome, a problem to solve so I could continue my humanitarian work. But working with child development experts, custody veterans, and Sophia herself had revealed something much deeper. This wasn't just about my right to travel, or even my ability to maintain custody. It was about what kind of future we wanted for children like Sophia, a future where young people understood their global responsibilities, where service to others was celebrated rather than questioned, where parents were encouraged to model the highest values of compassion and dedication. James thought he was protecting Sophia from the instability of international travel. But he was actually trying to protect her from developing the global perspective, cultural competency, and service ethic that would prepare her for leadership in an interconnected world. The learning curve of the past month had taught me that winning this custody battle required more than defending my fitness as a mother. It required advocating for a vision of childhood that valued global citizenship over comfortable isolation, service over security, and love that extends beyond immediate family over love that builds walls around itself. Sophia was learning lessons that would shape her into an extraordinary adult if I could maintain the right to continue teaching them. The full custody hearing would determine not just where she lived, but what kind of person she'd become. James had no idea that in attacking my humanitarian work, he'd given me the perfect opportunity to demonstrate why the world needed more children raised with Sophia's understanding of service, sacrifice, and global responsibility. The waiting room at Dr. Harrison's office felt different when I returned 3 weeks later to receive the custody evaluation results. This time, I wasn't the anxious mother desperately hoping to prove her fitness. I was a woman who had spent the past month building an ironclad case that my humanitarian work benefited rather than harmed my daughter. Patricia sat beside me, her usual professional composure edged with what I recognized as cautious optimism. "Elena, remember that even a positive evaluation is just one piece of the puzzle," she warned quietly. "But if Dr. Harrison's report supports our position, it fundamentally changes the dynamics of this case." Dr. Harrison entered the consultation room carrying a thick file that would determine whether James's narrative of maternal neglect had any psychological foundation. Her expression was professionally neutral, but I caught something in her eyes, a slight brightness that made my heart race with hope. "Dr. Martinez, Ms. Hendricks, thank you for returning to discuss my evaluation findings." She opened the file and pulled out what appeared to be a comprehensive report, easily 30 pages of analysis, test results, and professional recommendations. "Let me begin with my clinical observations of Sophia's emotional state and psychological development." Dr. Harrison's voice carried the authority of 15 years in child psychology, and her next words would either validate everything I believed about my parenting or shatter my confidence entirely. "Sophia demonstrates remarkably secure attachment patterns, above-average emotional intelligence, and exceptional global awareness for her age group. Rather than exhibiting signs of maternal abandonment or separation anxiety, she shows pride in her mother's work and sophisticated understanding of its humanitarian importance." I felt Patricia's hand briefly touch my arm, a gesture of shared relief, but Dr. Harrison was just beginning. More significantly, Sophia's responses to standardized empathy assessments place her in the 95th percentile for her age group. When presented with scenarios involving helping others versus personal convenience, she consistently chose service-oriented solutions and demonstrated moral reasoning typically found in children 2 to 3 years older. Dr. Harrison turned to a specific page in her report. "I want to share Sophia's response to one particular assessment question. When asked what makes her most proud about her family, she said, 'My mommy fixes kids who can't eat or smile, and she taught me that when you can help people who are hurt, you should help them, even if it's hard.'" The words hit me like a physical blow of validation. Sophia understood not just what I did, but why it mattered, and how it connected to fundamental values of service and compassion. "Dr. Harrison," Patricia asked, "in your professional opinion, has Dr. Martinez's travel schedule negatively impacted Sophia's psychological development?" Quite the opposite. Sophia's exposure to her mother's humanitarian work has accelerated her emotional and moral development in ways that benefit her profoundly. She demonstrates cultural competency, linguistic curiosity, and global awareness that most children never develop. Dr. Harrison pulled out several of Sophia's drawings from the evaluation session. These artistic expressions show a child who sees the world as interconnected, who understands that children in other countries face challenges she doesn't, and who feels a sense of responsibility to help when possible. One drawing particularly stood out. Sophia had drawn children from different countries holding hands around a globe, with me in surgical scrubs in the center. The image was titled, "Mommy Helps Kids Everywhere Be Happy." "Dr. Harrison," I asked, finding my voice despite my overwhelming emotions, "what would you recommend regarding custody arrangements?" Her answer was unequivocal and professionally delivered. "I recommend that Sophia remain in her mother's primary custody with continued permission for Dr. Martinez to pursue humanitarian missions. Restricting this travel would deprive Sophia of educational and developmental opportunities that are clearly benefiting her growth as a compassionate, globally aware individual." The report continued with detailed analysis supporting every aspect of our case. Dr. Harrison had documented Sophia's advanced language acquisition, her empathy development, her cultural curiosity, and her emotional resilience. But most importantly, she'd identified the fundamental flaw in James's position. Mr. Rodriguez's concerns about stability appear to stem from conventional assumptions about child-rearing that don't account for the educational value of international humanitarian exposure. His approach would limit Sophia's development to traditional local experiences, potentially stunting the remarkable global awareness she's already developed. As we left Dr. Harrison's office, Patricia was practically beaming. "Elena, this report doesn't just support our case, it demolishes James's arguments entirely. An independent court-appointed psychologist has essentially testified that your humanitarian work makes you a better parent, not a worse one." The impact of Dr. Harrison's report became clear immediately. Within 48 hours, Margaret Whitfield requested a meeting to discuss potential settlement options, legal speak for recognizing that her client's position had become untenable. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. 2 days after receiving Dr. Harrison's report, I got a call from Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Director of Pediatric Services at Children's Hospital of Denver, where I maintain my local practice between missions. "Elena, I just received the most remarkable email from the Denver Public School District. They want to invite you to speak at their Global Citizenship Education Conference next month about raising internationally minded children." I was confused. "Dr. Walsh, how did they even know about my personal situation?" Quote, "Apparently word has gotten around the medical community about your custody case and the psychological evaluation results. Dr. Harrison's report is being circulated as an example of how international humanitarian work benefits families rather than harming them. The invitation was significant beyond personal validation. The Denver School District wanted me to present Sophia's development as a model for how children could benefit from understanding global humanitarian work. They were essentially asking me to advocate publicly for the same parenting philosophy I was defending in court." "Elena, there's more. The Colorado Medical Association wants to nominate you for their Humanitarian Service Award, and they're specifically citing your success in balancing international medical missions with exceptional parenting." Each piece of recognition felt surreal. 3 months ago, James had portrayed me as a selfish mother who prioritized strangers over my own daughter. Now medical and educational professionals were celebrating my approach as a model worth emulating. The momentum continued building when Carmen Rodriguez called with extraordinary news about her documentary footage. "Elena, the International Documentary Film Festival accepted my submission about medical humanitarianism, and they specifically want to feature the segments about you and Sophia. But here's the incredible part. The UN Commission on Global Education wants to use your story in their campaign about raising globally conscious children." The irony was overwhelming. James's custody challenge, intended to limit my humanitarian work, had instead elevated it to national attention as an example of exceptional parenting through international service. But the most meaningful recognition came from the children I'd operated on and their families. Maria Santos called from Colombia with news that made me cry with joy. "Dr. Elena, Diego wants to show you something." She held the phone toward her 8-year-old son, whose cleft palate repair had been one of my first successful surgeries 3 years ago. "Doctora Elena," Diego said in careful English he'd been practicing, "I want to be a doctor like you when I grow up. And I want Sophia to know that because she was brave when you came to help me, I can smile and talk to my friends now." This was followed by a video call from the family of Maria, the 5-year-old I'd operated on in Kenya just weeks ago. Maria's parents had organized other families whose children I'd treated, and together they'd created a thank you video specifically for Sophia. "We want Sophia to know," Maria's mother said in the video, "that her sacrifice allowed our children to receive the gift of healing. She is a hero to families across 3 countries." When I showed Sophia the video that evening, her response crystallized everything I'd been fighting for. She watched with rapt attention as child after child thanked her for being brave while her mommy traveled to help them. When it ended, she turned to me with shining eyes. "Mommy, I never knew that being brave when you travel helped so many kids. Can we write letters to all of them and tell them about school here in America?" That simple request, wanting to maintain relationships with children whose lives had been changed through my work, demonstrated the global citizenship and cultural competency that experts were celebrating. Sophia wasn't just tolerating my missions. She was becoming a bridge between cultures, a young person who understood that love and healing transcend national boundaries. The culmination of this wave of recognition came when I received a call from Dr. Sarah Kim, the former Doctors Without Borders surgeon, who had mentored me through developing my legal strategy. "Elena, I just heard from the American Academy of Pediatrics. They want to create a new award category for physicians who excel at balancing international humanitarian work with exceptional parenting. They're calling it the Martinez Award for Global Family Leadership." The news was overwhelming. An award named after me, recognizing the very thing James had attacked as irresponsible. The pediatric medical community was institutionalizing support for exactly the kind of parenting I was fighting to protect. "There's more," Dr. Kim continued. "The International Committee of Medical Missions wants you to lead a new initiative training other medical professionals in how to involve their families in humanitarian work. Your approach with Sophia is becoming a model for the entire field." As December progressed, the accumulated recognition created undeniable momentum for our custody case. Patricia was fielding calls from legal colleagues asking about our strategy, while journalists were requesting interviews about balancing parenthood with international medical service. But the most significant development came from an entirely unexpected source. Judge Foster's clerk called Patricia with an unusual request. "The judge wants to know if Dr. Martinez would be willing to have Sophia participate in a brief, informal conversation during the next hearing. Not testimony, just an opportunity for the court to observe Sophia's comfort level, discussing her mother's work." Patricia was initially hesitant. "Elena, having Sophia speak in court is risky. Children can be unpredictable, and anything she says becomes part of the record." But I felt confident in Sophia's understanding and articulation of our situation. "Patricia, Sophia has been living with this her entire life. She understands my work better than most adults. If Judge Foster wants to hear from her, I trust Sophia to represent herself honestly." We spent the following week preparing Sophia for the possibility of speaking with Judge Foster. I emphasized that she should simply tell the truth about her feelings and experiences, without trying to say what she thought adults wanted to hear. "Mommy, what if the judge asks if I miss you when you travel?" "You tell her the truth, sweetheart. That you do miss me, but you understand why the work is important, and you're proud to be part of helping other children." Quote, "What if she asks if I want you to stop traveling?" I knelt to Sophia's eye level, choosing my words carefully. "You tell her what you really think, not what you think anyone wants to hear. What would you say?" Sophia considered this seriously. "I would say that I want you to keep helping kids who need surgery, because that's what makes you the best mommy in the world. Not the surgery part, but the caring about other people part." Her answer reminded me why this battle was worth fighting. Sophia understood that my humanitarian work wasn't separate from my mothering. It was an expression of the values I wanted to model for her. As we prepared for the next phase of the custody hearing, I realized that the past month had fundamentally transformed our position. We'd moved from defending my fitness as a mother to celebrating a parenting philosophy that was gaining national recognition. James had intended to isolate me by attacking my humanitarian work. Instead, he'd created a platform for demonstrating why raising globally conscious, service-oriented children was exactly what the world needed. The first major success was complete, not just in terms of psychological evaluation and professional recognition, but in Sophia's own articulation of why our approach to family life was something worth protecting and celebrating. James had no idea that his attack on my dedication to serving others had transformed our custody case into a national conversation about raising children who understand their responsibility to help heal the world. The first warning came through Patricia's office phone at 8:17 a.m. on a cold January morning. Margaret Whitfield's assistant had called to inform us that James's legal team was requesting an emergency hearing to, quote, address new evidence of Dr. Martinez's reckless endangerment of Sophia through exposure to international health risks and political instability. Patricia hung up the phone with a grim expression that immediately told me our period of momentum was about to face serious pushback. Elena, they're not backing down. If anything, your recent recognition has made them more desperate, and desperate opponents are often the most dangerous. I set down my coffee, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety that had become my constant companion since this custody battle began. What kind of new evidence could they possibly have? I don't know yet, but Whitfield's strategy appears to be shifting. Since they can't argue that Sophia is psychologically harmed by your work, they're going to argue that you're physically endangering her by exposing her to international travel risks. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following Friday, giving us less than a week to prepare for whatever accusations James and his attorney were planning to unleash. But within hours, it became clear that this wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was a coordinated campaign designed to undermine everything we'd accomplished. The first blow came through an unexpected channel. Sophia's school principal, Mrs. Davidson, called that afternoon requesting an urgent meeting to discuss, quote, concerns that had been brought to the district's attention regarding Sophia's international travel exposure. When I arrived at Denver Elementary that evening, Mrs. Davidson's usual warm demeanor had been replaced by professional distance that immediately put me on guard. Sitting beside her was Dr. Richard Fleming, the district's safety coordinator, and a woman I didn't recognize who introduced herself as Ms. Janet Torres from the district's legal department. Dr. Martinez, Mrs. Davidson began carefully, we've received communication from your ex-husband's attorney expressing concerns about Sophia's participation in international travel to regions with potential health and safety risks. My heart sank as I realized James was trying to turn Sophia's school into another battlefield in our custody war. Mrs. Davidson, Sophia has only accompanied me on 2 missions, both to established medical facilities with full security protocols. Dr. Fleming consulted a folder of documents I couldn't see. Dr. Martinez, we've been provided with State Department travel advisories for several countries where you've taken Sophia, including warnings about infectious diseases, political instability, and inadequate medical infrastructure. The woman from legal leaned forward with the cold efficiency of someone trained to minimize institutional liability. Dr. Martinez, the district has a responsibility to ensure student safety. If Sophia is being exposed to international health risks through your travel, we need to evaluate whether additional medical screening is required for her return to school. I felt anger rising in my throat. James was trying to make Sophia's education conditional on my abandoning humanitarian work. Ms. Torres, Sophia has never experienced health issues related to my missions. She receives all recommended vaccinations and medical clearances before any international travel. Nevertheless, Dr. Fleming continued, we've been advised that exposure to certain tropical diseases, contaminated water sources, and substandard medical facilities could pose risks to Sophia and, by extension, to other students if she returns to school as an asymptomatic carrier. The accusation was both medically absurd and strategically brilliant. James wasn't just questioning my judgment. He was positioning my humanitarian work as a public health threat that could endanger other children. Mrs. Davidson looked uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Dr. Martinez, I want you to know that Sophia is one of our most remarkable students. Her cultural awareness, language skills, and empathy toward other children are extraordinary. But we have to follow district protocols when safety concerns are raised. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Ms. Torres pulled out a document that looked like it had been prepared by attorneys rather than educators. We're implementing a temporary policy requiring additional medical screening for students who travel to countries with CDC travel advisories. Sophia would need comprehensive infectious disease testing after each international trip before returning to class. The policy was clearly designed to make my mission so burdensome and stigmatizing that I'd be forced to choose between Sophia's education and my humanitarian work. James had found a way to use bureaucratic procedures to accomplish what direct legal action hadn't achieved. Additionally, Dr. Fleming added, we're requiring parental notification to all families in Sophia's class when she returns from international travel, explaining the medical screening protocols we're implementing. The implications were devastating. Sophia would be singled out as a potential health threat, her classmates' parents would be warned about her travel exposure, and my humanitarian work would be framed as reckless behavior that endangered the entire school community. Mrs. Davidson, I said, struggling to keep my voice level, this policy is being created specifically to target Sophia because of my profession. You're allowing my ex-husband to use the school district as a weapon in our custody battle. Mrs. Davidson's discomfort was obvious, but she was clearly following legal advice from the district's attorneys. Dr. Martinez, the policy applies to all students with international travel exposure. It's not targeting Sophia specifically. But Sophia is currently the only student affected, and the policy was created immediately after receiving communication from my ex-husband's attorney. This is retaliation disguised as safety protocol. Ms. Torres's expression remained coldly professional. Dr. Martinez, if you disagree with district safety policies, you're welcome to pursue alternative educational arrangements for Sophia. The threat was clear: comply with stigmatizing medical protocols, or remove Sophia from the school she loved, where she'd thrived academically and socially. James had found a way to make my humanitarian work directly impact Sophia's daily life, in ways that couldn't be hidden or minimized. As I left the school that evening, I realized that Margaret Whitfield's new strategy was far more sophisticated than their previous arguments. Instead of claiming Sophia was psychologically harmed by my work, they were positioning me as someone whose professional activities created tangible risks to my daughter and the broader community. The campaign escalated over the next 2 days. Patricia received a formal complaint that had been filed with the Colorado State Medical Board, questioning whether my international travel compromised my ability to maintain consistent patient care relationships in my domestic practice. Elena, this complaint is professionally dangerous, Patricia explained as we reviewed the allegations. They're arguing that your humanitarian missions create gaps in your local patient care that constitute medical abandonment. The accusation was both false and damaging. I maintained coverage arrangements for all my local patients during missions, worked with qualified colleagues who provided seamless care continuity, and had never received patient complaints about availability or quality of care. Who filed the complaint? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. It's anonymous, but the language and specific details suggest someone with intimate knowledge of your practice schedule and personal arrangements. The medical board is required to investigate all complaints, regardless of their apparent motivation. A medical board investigation could take months, and would require me to defend not just my parenting but my professional competence. Even if the complaint was ultimately dismissed, the investigation itself would create a cloud of professional suspicion that could affect my career for years. The third prong of the attack came through social media. Someone had created anonymous accounts on Facebook and Twitter, sharing, quote, concerns about medical professionals who, quote, abandon their own children to perform cosmetic surgery in foreign countries. The posts included distorted information about my missions, describing cleft palate repair as unnecessary cosmetic procedures, and characterizing my humanitarian work as medical tourism that prioritized personal recognition over family responsibilities. Carmen Rodriguez called me in distress after discovering that clips from her documentary footage had been edited and posted online with deliberately misleading context. Elena, someone took footage of Sophia looking tired after a long travel day and paired it with narration about children suffering from parental neglect. It's completely dishonest, but it's being shared across parenting forums. The social media campaign was particularly insidious because it targeted the general public's assumptions about international humanitarian work. Most people had little understanding of medical missions, making them susceptible to narratives that portrayed such work as selfish adventure rather than essential healthcare service. But the most devastating blow came on Thursday evening, just 1 day before our emergency hearing. Patricia called with news that made my blood run cold. Elena, Whitfield has filed a motion requesting court-ordered prohibition of Sophia's international travel pending the custody resolution. But that's not the worst part. They've also requested mandatory psychological counseling for Sophia to address what they're calling, quote, induced trauma from inappropriate exposure to international medical procedures. The motion characterized my decision to involve Sophia in age-appropriate aspects of my humanitarian work as psychological manipulation that forced her to suppress her natural anxiety about maternal absence. They were arguing that Sophia's positive responses to my missions were actually symptoms of psychological conditioning rather than genuine emotional health. They have testimony from Dr. Ronald Marcus, a child psychologist who specializes in parental alienation syndrome. He's prepared to argue that Sophia's support for your missions represents Stockholm Syndrome-like attachment to traumatic experiences. I felt sick. Dr. Marcus was known in family law circles as a hired gun who testified for parents trying to discredit their ex-spouse's psychological evaluations. His involvement suggested James was prepared to spend whatever it took to destroy my credibility. Patricia, they're trying to pathologize everything positive about Sophia's development. Her empathy becomes psychological manipulation, her cultural awareness becomes inappropriate exposure, her pride in my work becomes trauma bonding. Exactly. And because Dr. Marcus is a licensed psychologist, his testimony carries weight, even if his methods are questionable. We need to be prepared for him to argue that Dr. Harrison's evaluation missed signs of psychological abuse disguised as emotional maturity. That evening, I sat in my home office surrounded by evidence of Sophia's thriving development. Her artwork celebrating different cultures, thank you letters from families of children I'd operated on, photos of her engaged and happy during international missions. But I was seeing it all through the distorted lens of James's accusations. Every example of Sophia's global awareness could be reframed as inappropriate exposure to adult responsibilities. Every demonstration of her empathy could be characterized as psychological pressure to support my career. Every sign of her emotional maturity could be presented as premature loss of childhood innocence. Sophia found me there an hour later, her bedtime routine completed and her face bright with excitement about a school project she was working on. She was creating a presentation about different countries, featuring photos from my missions and information about cleft palate treatment around the world. Mommy, Mrs. Peterson says my project is the most creative she's ever seen. I'm teaching my class about how kids in other countries need different kinds of help than kids here. Looking at my daughter's enthusiastic face, I realized the fundamental cruelty of James's strategy. He was trying to convince a court that Sophia's greatest strengths, her empathy, cultural awareness, and understanding of service, were actually symptoms of psychological damage. Sweetheart, I said carefully, you know that some people don't understand why mommy travels for work, right? Yeah, but that's because they don't know about the kids who need surgery. Once they understand, they think it's good. Like Mrs. Peterson does. Sophia's simple confidence reminded me of what we were really fighting for. James wanted to raise her in a world where comfort and conventionality mattered more than service and compassion. He was willing to pathologize her emotional intelligence to protect her from developing global consciousness. The opposition had emerged with coordinated attacks on my professional competence, my daughter's education, my public reputation, and my psychological fitness as a mother. They'd turned my humanitarian work from a source of recognition into a liability that threatened every aspect of our lives. But as I tucked Sophia into bed that night, listening to her prayers for children around the world who needed medical help, I realized that James had made a crucial miscalculation. He was attacking not just me, but the values I'd taught Sophia to cherish. And Sophia was old enough to understand the difference between people who helped others and people who tried to stop them from helping. Tomorrow's emergency hearing would determine whether James's coordinated assault could undo months of positive momentum. But regardless of the outcome, I knew that Sophia had learned lessons about service, sacrifice, and standing up for what's right that no court ruling could take away from her. The opposition had shown its full strength, but they'd also revealed their fundamental weakness. They were fighting against a mother and daughter who understood that love means helping others, not protecting yourself from the world's problems. The emergency hearing had been a disaster. Judge Foster's courtroom felt different this time, colder, more skeptical, as Margaret Whitfield methodically presented a 3-hour case, portraying me as a reckless mother who disguised child endangerment as humanitarian service. I sat beside Patricia, watching our carefully built momentum crumble under the weight of James's coordinated assault. Dr. Ronald Marcus had been particularly effective in his testimony, using his credentials as a child psychologist to systematically dismantle every positive aspect of Sophia's development that Dr. Harrison had celebrated. With clinical precision, he reframed Sophia's empathy as emotional parentification, her cultural awareness as inappropriate adult responsibility, and her pride in my work as trauma bonding disguised as maturity. Your Honor, Dr. Marcus had concluded with practiced authority, this child has been conditioned to suppress her natural anxiety about maternal abandonment by accepting responsibility for her mother's career choices. What appears to be emotional intelligence is actually a psychological defense mechanism that will cause significant damage in adolescence and adulthood. Judge Foster had listened to his testimony with the same neutral attention she'd given Dr. Harrison's evaluation, but I'd caught something troubling in her expression, a growing uncertainty about the conclusions she'd seemed ready to support just weeks earlier. The school district's testimony had been equally damaging. Dr. Fleming presented their new medical screening policies as reasonable safety measures, while carefully avoiding any mention of the timing that made clear they'd been created specifically to target Sophia. The district's legal representative had been even more effective, presenting their requirements as protecting other children from potential health risks rather than acknowledging their role in James's legal strategy. But the most devastating moment had come, when Margaret Whitfield introduced evidence I'd never seen coming. She'd obtained copies of my mission scheduling emails, showing dates when I'd extended trips by a few days to handle surgical complications or complete additional procedures. In Whitfield's presentation, these schedule changes became evidence of my prioritizing foreign patients over parental commitments. Dr. Martinez consistently chooses to extend her time away from Sophia when convenient opportunities arise, Whitfield had argued. She treats her daughter's needs as flexible while treating strangers' medical requirements as absolute priorities. The fact that these schedule changes had occurred only when Sophia was staying with my mother, during school breaks and with advanced planning, was lost in Whitfield's narrative. She'd successfully reframed my dedication to completing surgical commitments as evidence of misplaced priorities. Judge Foster's ruling had been a gut punch. While she didn't grant James's request for immediate custody transfer, she'd imposed temporary restrictions that felt like judicial skepticism about everything Patricia and I had argued. Pending further evaluation, Dr. Martinez is prohibited from taking Sophia on any international travel. Additionally, the court is ordering comprehensive psychological evaluation of Sophia by an independent panel of 3 child psychologists, including assessment of any potential psychological pressure related to her mother's career choices. The gavel's sound had echoed in the courtroom like a death knell for everything I'd believed about my fitness as a mother. Walking out of the courthouse that afternoon, I'd felt like I was drowning in doubt about every parenting decision I'd made over the past 7 years. Now, sitting in my darkened living room at 2 a.m. 3 days later, I couldn't escape the questions that James's legal team had planted in my mind. Had I been so focused on helping other children that I'd failed to see signs of psychological stress in my own daughter? Was Sophia's mature understanding of my work actually a coping mechanism for abandonment anxiety I'd been too selfish to recognize? The medical board investigation had moved forward with bureaucratic efficiency that felt designed to maximize professional damage. I'd received a formal letter requiring me to respond to allegations that my international travel schedule compromised patient care continuity, violated professional standards for accessibility, and demonstrated poor judgment in balancing competing responsibilities. The questions they'd posed cut to the heart of my professional identity. How could I justify being unavailable to local patients while treating international cases? What protocols ensured that my humanitarian missions didn't interfere with emergency coverage for existing patients? How did I reconcile claims of medical necessity for international travel with availability requirements for domestic practice? Each question implied that my humanitarian work was essentially recreational activity that I'd elevated above professional obligations. The medical board wasn't interested in the life-saving nature of cleft palate surgery for children with no other treatment options. They were focused on whether my absence from Colorado constituted abandonment of patients who'd come to depend on my availability. Even worse, the school district's medical screening requirements had turned Sophia's return to class into a weekly ordeal. Every Monday, she underwent blood tests, temperature monitoring, and health questionnaires that made her feel like a potential disease carrier rather than a student returning from educational experiences. Sophia had initially handled the medical screening with characteristic resilience, chatting with the school nurse about countries she'd visited and explaining why the tests weren't necessary. But by the third week, I'd noticed her enthusiasm dimming. She'd started asking why other kids didn't need the same tests, why parents at pickup looked at her differently, why her teacher seemed more formal during their interactions. "Mommy," she'd asked the previous evening while I helped her with homework, "am I sick from traveling with you?" The question had hit me like a physical blow. Sophia was beginning to internalize the message that her exposure to my humanitarian work was somehow contaminating or dangerous. The confident, globally aware child I'd raised was starting to doubt whether her experiences were positive or harmful. "Of course not, sweetheart. You're perfectly healthy, and traveling has taught you wonderful things about the world. Then why do I need special tests that other kids don't need? And why did Tommy's mom ask Mrs. Peterson if it was safe for me to be in class after I came back from Kenya?" I'd struggled to explain adult fears and prejudices to a 7-year-old who'd never thought of international travel as anything but normal and educational. How could I tell her that some people saw her exposure to different cultures as dangerous rather than enriching? How could I explain that her father was using her education against both of us? The social media campaign had continued relentlessly, with anonymous accounts sharing increasingly inflammatory content about medical professionals who abandon their children for ego gratification. Someone had discovered my speaking engagement at the Global Citizenship Education Conference and reframed it as evidence that I was exploiting my daughter's trauma for professional advancement. The comments sections were filled with judgment from people who'd never performed humanitarian surgery, never seen children suffering from untreated clefts, never understood the life-changing impact of providing but their criticism still penetrated my defenses, making me question whether I'd been deluding myself about the value of my work. "Maybe they're right," I whispered to my empty living room. "Maybe I have been prioritizing strangers over my own daughter. Maybe Sophia's maturity is just her way of coping with a mother who's never fully present." Quote, "The doubt was like poison, seeping into every memory of my humanitarian missions. Had I extended that trip to Guatemala because the children genuinely needed additional surgery, or because I enjoyed the professional satisfaction of complex cases? Had I involved Sophia in video calls with patients because it was educational for her, or because it made me feel better about my absences?" Every photo of Sophia smiling during international missions now seemed potentially staged. A little girl performing happiness to please a mother who might leave again if she expressed any negative feelings. Every expression of pride in my work could be reinterpreted as a child desperately trying to make sense of maternal abandonment, by finding meaning in the very thing that took her mother away. The worst part was that I could no longer trust my own perceptions. If Sophia had been psychologically damaged by my travel schedule, would I be able to recognize the signs? Or had my investment in believing that my work benefited her blinded me to evidence of harm? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through months of photos documenting our life together. Sophia at her school science fair, explaining her project about water purification in developing countries. Sophia teaching her dolls surgery procedures she'd observed during missions. Sophia writing thank you letters to families of children I'd operated on. Sophia learning Spanish phrases to communicate with international patients. Each image could be interpreted two ways: evidence of a thriving child developing global consciousness, or documentation of a little girl forced to find meaning in experiences that were actually traumatic. The same activities that Dr. Harrison had celebrated as signs of emotional intelligence could be reframed as symptoms of psychological conditioning. My mother found me in the living room at 3 a.m., still scrolling through photos and second-guessing every parenting decision I'd made since Sophia's birth. "Maija," she said softly, settling beside me on the couch, "you look like you haven't slept in days." "Mom, what if they're right? What if I've been so focused on helping other children that I've damaged my own daughter?" Carmen studied my face with the patience of someone who'd raised 5 children and understood that parental self-doubt was often inversely related to actual parenting quality. Elena, tell me something. When Sophia talks about your work, does she sound like a child who's been harmed? But what if she's just learned to hide her true feelings? What if I've trained her to suppress her anxiety to make me feel better about leaving? Have you ever asked her directly how she feels about your missions? The question was so simple that it revealed how thoroughly James's legal strategy had undermined my confidence. Yes, many times. She always says she's proud of the work and wants to continue learning about it. And when you return from trips, how does she respond? I remembered Sophia's genuine excitement when I came home, her eagerness to hear about surgical cases, her detailed questions about patient recoveries. She seems genuinely interested and engaged. Elena, I've watched that little girl for 7 years. I've seen her when she's happy, sad, confused, and scared. When she talks about your humanitarian work, she radiates pride and understanding. That's not trauma bonding. That's a child who's learned that love means helping others. But even my mother's reassurance couldn't fully penetrate the doubt that James's accusations had created. What if we were all wrong? What if the medical professionals, educators, and family members who supported my approach were missing something that only a trained psychologist like Dr. Marcus could identify? The independent psychological evaluation ordered by Judge Foster was scheduled to begin the following week, conducted by a panel of 3 child psychologists who would spend 6 weeks assessing Sophia's emotional state, cognitive development, and psychological response to my travel schedule. Their findings would determine whether James's claims of psychological damage had any foundation, but waiting for those results meant living with uncertainty about whether my entire parenting philosophy had been fundamentally misguided. Every interaction with Sophia became fraught with anxiety about whether I was pressuring her to support my career or genuinely listening to her authentic feelings. The professional isolation was equally devastating. Colleagues who'd previously celebrated my humanitarian work now seemed cautious in their interactions, uncertain whether supporting me might implicate them in accusations of professional irresponsibility. Hospital administrators had started requesting detailed coverage plans for my international missions, treating my humanitarian work as a liability to be managed rather than a service to be supported. Even Dr. Sarah Kim, who'd been such a strong mentor throughout this process, had called with concerning news about the broader implications of my case. Elena, I'm hearing from other humanitarian physicians who are worried about how your custody battle might affect their own family situations. Some are considering scaling back international missions to avoid similar legal challenges. The possibility that my fight to protect my own humanitarian work might discourage other medical professionals from pursuing international service added another layer of pressure to an already overwhelming situation. If I lost this custody battle, the precedent could affect hundreds of physicians who balance domestic practice with international humanitarian commitments. As dawn approached, I found myself questioning not just my parenting, but my fundamental understanding of what it meant to be a good mother. Was putting my daughter first supposed to mean protecting her from exposure to the world's problems? Should maternal love create a bubble of security rather than preparing children to engage with global challenges? The woman who'd confidently defended her humanitarian work just months earlier now felt like a stranger. In her place sat someone plagued by doubt, second-guessing every decision, wondering if the very qualities she'd celebrated in her daughter were actually symptoms of psychological damage she'd been too selfish to recognize. Sophia found me in the kitchen the next morning, making coffee with hands that shook from exhaustion and anxiety. She wrapped her arms around my waist in the spontaneous hug that had always been her greeting, but this time I found myself analyzing her affection for signs of performance or psychological compensation. "Mommy, you seem sad lately. Is it because of the court stuff about your doctor work?" Her direct question cut through my spiral of self-doubt with the clarity that only children can provide. Sophia wasn't hiding her feelings or performing emotional support. She was genuinely concerned about my well-being and directly addressing what she'd observed. "I'm worried about some things, sweetheart, but I'm more worried about how all this legal stuff is affecting you." Sophia considered this with the same serious expression she used when thinking through complex problems. "Mommy, some of the kids at school say that traveling to other countries is dangerous and that you shouldn't take me with you, but they don't understand that you help kids who are really sick. How does that make you feel when other kids say those things? It makes me sad for them, because they don't know about Diego and Maria and all the other kids who got better because of your surgeries. They think helping people in other countries is bad, but I know it's good." Her answer reminded me of something I'd forgotten in the midst of James's attacks. Sophia's understanding of my work wasn't the result of psychological conditioning. It was the natural response of a compassionate child who'd been given the opportunity to understand that love extends beyond immediate family. But the doubt remained, whispering that even this interaction could be interpreted as evidence of a daughter trying to reassure a mother whose emotional stability depended on validation of her career choices. The next 6 weeks would determine whether my faith in Sophia's authentic development was justified, or whether I'd been deluding myself about the impact of my choices on the most important person in my life. Either way, the internal struggle had already extracted a devastating cost. I was no longer certain that the mother I'd tried to be was the mother Sophia actually needed. The call came at 6:30 a.m. on a Saturday morning when I was sitting in my kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold, while I spiraled through another sleepless night of self-doubt. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end was one I'd never forget. Drive. Elizabeth Warren, the legendary pediatric surgeon who had pioneered international cleft palate missions 40 years ago, and whose work had inspired my own humanitarian path. "Dr. Martinez, I hope I'm not calling too early. I've been following your custody case through the medical community, and I believe it's time we had a conversation." I nearly dropped the phone. Dr. Warren was a living legend in our field. The woman who had established the protocols for international pediatric surgery missions, founded 3 medical relief organizations, and trained a generation of surgeons in humanitarian medicine. She'd received every major award in our profession and had been featured on the cover of Time magazine as one of the world's most influential physicians. "Dr. Warren, I'm honored that you called, but I'm not sure what I could possibly tell you that you don't already know." Her laugh was warm and knowing. "Elena, may I call you Elena? I'm not calling to learn from you. I'm calling to share something that took me 30 years to understand. Would you be willing to meet for breakfast? I'm in Denver visiting my daughter, and I think my experience might provide some perspective on what you're facing." 2 hours later, I sat across from Dr. Warren at a quiet cafe in downtown Denver, feeling like a medical student again in the presence of someone whose work had literally shaped my career. At 72, she radiated the confidence of someone who had faced every challenge our profession could offer, and emerged with wisdom that only comes from decades of service to others. "Elena, let me start by telling you about a conversation I had with my son David when he was 8 years old, about Sophia's age now." Dr. Warren's eyes held the warmth of someone who had lived through similar struggles and found meaning on the other side. David came home from school upset because his teacher had asked the class to write about their mother's jobs, and he didn't know how to explain that I traveled to fix children's faces in countries most of his classmates had never heard of. He was embarrassed by the complexity of my work and frustrated that he couldn't make his friends understand why I was gone so often. I leaned forward, recognizing the familiar challenge of helping children process their parents' humanitarian commitments. "How did you handle that?" "I made the biggest mistake of my early parenting. I apologized to him. I told him I was sorry my work was complicated, sorry it made him feel different from other kids, sorry that loving other children sometimes meant being away from him." Dr. Warren's expression grew serious. That apology taught him that my humanitarian work was something to be ashamed of rather than celebrated. The parallel to my own recent self-doubt was uncomfortable and obvious. What happened? David spent his teenage years rejecting everything connected to my medical missions. He refused to hear about my work, showed no interest in international cultures, and actively avoided any career path that involved helping others. It wasn't until he was in his 30s, after becoming a father himself, that he understood what he'd missed by closing himself off to the values I'd tried to model. Dr. Warren pulled out her phone and showed me a recent photo. A man in his 40s, surrounded by children at what appeared to be a refugee camp, wearing scrubs and the satisfied expression of someone engaged in meaningful work. That's David now. He's a trauma surgeon who spends 4 months every year providing emergency medical care in refugee camps. He told me last year that his biggest regret was wasting 20 years rejecting the very calling that now gives his life the most meaning. The story hit me like a revelation. You're saying that apologizing for your humanitarian work actually damaged his development? I'm saying that when we treat our service to others as something to apologize for, we teach our children that helping people is a burden rather than a privilege. David learned to see my missions as competing with my love for him, instead of extending from it. Dr. Warren ordered another coffee and settled back in her chair with the patience of someone who understood that transformational conversations couldn't be rushed. Elena, tell me what you believed about your parenting before this custody battle began. I thought back to the confidence I'd felt just months earlier. I believed that exposing Sophia to my humanitarian work was one of the greatest gifts I could give her. I thought I was raising a globally conscious, empathetic child who understood that privilege comes with responsibility. And what evidence did you have for that belief? The question forced me to remember all the indicators I'd been trained to ignore by James's legal assault. Sophia's advanced empathy scores, her cultural curiosity, her genuine relationships with children from my missions, her pride in the work, her desire to help organize humanitarian projects at school. All of which remain true today, correct? Yes, but Dr. Marcus argues that those behaviors could indicate psychological conditioning rather than authentic development. Dr. Warren's expression hardened. Elena, let me tell you about Dr. Ronald Marcus. 30 years ago, he testified in a custody case involving a colleague of mine, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who was doing relief work in Somalia. Marcus argued that her dedication to international medicine indicated narcissistic personality disorder and inability to prioritize her children's needs. I felt a chill of recognition. What happened to Dr. Walsh? She lost primary custody of her 2 daughters, who were placed with their father, a man who believed that women's careers should never extend beyond what was convenient for their families. Both girls were forbidden from having any contact with their mother's humanitarian work. Dr. Warren's voice carried the weight of witnessing preventable tragedy. Those girls are adults now. One has struggled with depression and substance abuse for years, feeling disconnected from any sense of purpose beyond personal comfort. The other moved to Europe specifically to distance herself from her father's narrow worldview, and has spent the last decade trying to recover the global perspective she was denied during adolescence. The implications were devastating. They were damaged by being protected from their mother's humanitarian work. They were damaged by being taught that service to others was pathological, that loving beyond your immediate family was unhealthy, that engaging with the world's problems was someone else's responsibility. Dr. Warren leaned forward intently. Elena, what James is trying to do to Sophia isn't protection, it's amputation of her capacity for global citizenship. I felt something shifting in my chest, the first loosening of the doubt that had consumed me for weeks. But how do I know the difference between authentic development and psychological conditioning? How do I trust my own perceptions when experts like Dr. Marcus can reinterpret everything? Dr. Warren smiled with the confidence of someone who had faced this exact dilemma decades earlier. Let me ask you something, Elena. When Sophia talks about your humanitarian work, who benefits from her understanding? The children who receive surgery, their families, the medical teams we work with. And what does Sophia gain from supporting your missions? I considered this carefully. She learns about service, develops cultural awareness, builds empathy, understands global citizenship. Exactly. Authentic development benefits everyone involved. The child grows while contributing to something larger than herself. Psychological conditioning, on the other hand, benefits only the adult who's manipulating the child's responses. The distinction was clearer than anything Dr. Marcus had presented in his testimony. Sophia's support for my work wasn't just about making me feel better. It was about her own growth into a person who understood her responsibility to help others. Elena, there's something else you need to understand about this custody battle. James isn't just trying to change Sophia's living situation. He's trying to change who she becomes as a person. He wants to raise a daughter who believes that success means accumulating comfort and security. You're raising a daughter who believes that success means using your advantages to help others. Dr. Warren pulled out a folder of letters. These are from children I operated on 40 years ago. They're adults now, many of them doctors and humanitarian workers themselves. But more importantly, these are letters from my own children and grandchildren, thanking me for teaching them that love extends beyond family boundaries. She handed me a letter written in careful handwriting. This is from my granddaughter, who just finished her first year of medical school. She wrote this after completing a volunteer mission in Haiti. I read the letter with growing amazement. Dr. Warren's granddaughter described how her grandmother's humanitarian work had inspired her own medical career, how understanding global health disparities had shaped her worldview, how learning that privileged people have responsibilities to help others had given her life direction and meaning. Elena, this is what James is trying to prevent Sophia from becoming. A young person who understands that her advantages in life come with obligations to serve others. The conversation continued for 2 hours, with Dr. Warren sharing story after story of children who had thrived when their parents' humanitarian work was celebrated and struggled when it was hidden or apologized for. She introduced me to concepts I'd never considered: how children develop moral identity through observing their parents' service to others, how global awareness builds emotional resilience, how understanding privilege and responsibility creates psychological security rather than undermining it. The children who struggle, Dr. Warren explained, are usually those whose parents compartmentalize their humanitarian work, treating it as separate from family life rather than as an expression of family values. Sophia doesn't struggle because she's been included in understanding the meaning and importance of your missions. But perhaps the most important insight came when Dr. Warren shared her own experience with doubt and criticism. Elena, I've been attacked by colleagues who thought international missions were showboating, by family members who thought I was neglecting my children, by bureaucrats who thought my travel was irresponsible. Every humanitarian physician faces people who fundamentally don't understand that serving others is a calling, not a hobby. She paused, choosing her words carefully. What I learned over 40 years is that when you apologize for your calling, you give permission for others to diminish it. When you celebrate your service while acknowledging its challenges, you teach your children that meaningful work requires sacrifice and dedication. But what about the practical impact on Sophia? The school policies, the social stigma, the legal restrictions? Dr. Warren's expression grew fierce. Elena, do you know what message those school policies send to Sophia? They tell her that understanding other cultures is dangerous, that being exposed to global perspectives makes her a threat to other children, that her mother's life-saving work is somehow contaminating. The full implications hit me like a physical blow. The school district wasn't just implementing medical screening. They were teaching Sophia that her global awareness was something to be ashamed of. Those policies are designed to make Sophia choose between fitting in with her classmates and supporting her mother's humanitarian work. They're forcing her to see her greatest strengths as social liabilities. Dr. Warren pulled out her phone and showed me another photo. This one from a medical conference where she was receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, all beaming with pride. Elena, this photo was taken 5 years ago when I received the Global Health Leadership Award. Do you see any signs of psychological damage in my family? Any indication that my humanitarian work harmed my children's development? The photo showed a family radiating confidence, pride, and mutual affection. Her children and grandchildren clearly understood that Dr. Warren's work was something to celebrate, not endure. The difference, Dr. Warren continued, is that I learned to stop apologizing for serving others and started celebrating the privilege of being able to make a difference. My children learned that their temporary sacrifices enabled permanent healing for other children. As our breakfast meeting concluded, Dr. Warren handed me a business card with her personal contact information. Elena, I want you to call me anytime you need to remember why this fight is worth having. But more importantly, I want to make you an offer. What kind of offer? Next month, I'm leading a surgical mission to the Philippines with a team of 12 international surgeons. I want Sophia to accompany us, not just as your daughter, but as my guest and special assistant. I want to show the medical community and the legal system what it looks like when a child is genuinely thriving in an international humanitarian environment. The invitation was extraordinary. Drive. Warren's missions were legendary in our field, and being invited to participate was considered one of the highest honors in humanitarian medicine. Dr. Warren, Sophia can't travel internationally right now. Judge Foster prohibited it pending the psychological evaluation. Elena? That prohibition was based on James's unsubstantiated claims about psychological harm. If 3 independent child psychologists find no evidence of damage, which they won't, that restriction becomes legally untenable. She leaned forward with the intensity of someone who had spent decades fighting for what she believed in. But more importantly, I want to give Sophia an experience that will demonstrate beyond any doubt that her exposure to humanitarian work is beneficial rather than harmful. I want her to see the full scope of what medical missions accomplish and understand that she's been part of something extraordinary. Dr. Warren stood to leave, but turned back with one final piece of advice. Elena, remember that this custody battle isn't really about Sophia's welfare. It's about 2 completely different visions of what childhood should prepare her for. James wants to raise a child who believes the world's problems are someone else's responsibility. You're raising a child who believes that helping others is everyone's privilege and obligation. She paused at the cafe door. The question isn't whether your humanitarian work has affected Sophia. Of course it has. The question is whether those effects prepare her to be the kind of adult the world desperately needs, or the kind of adult who builds walls around her own comfort. As I watched Dr. Warren leave, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Clarity about what I was fighting for and why it mattered. Sophia's development hadn't been damaged by exposure to my humanitarian work. It had been enhanced by understanding that love extends beyond immediate family, that privilege comes with responsibility, and that using your skills to help others is one of the highest expressions of human potential. The doubt that had consumed me for weeks began dissolving, replaced by renewed confidence in the values I'd tried to model for Sophia, and determination to protect her right to continue growing into the globally conscious, compassionate person she was becoming. James wanted to shelter Sophia from the world's complexity. I wanted to prepare her to help solve the world's problems. The custody battle would determine which vision of childhood and which vision of love would shape my daughter's future. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.